Of course, it is Saturday morning for me. This is probably the one day off a week I get, although even that's not guaranteed in stone. The job I work for, we have to go with what the customers need, and some days I'll work three different times during the day, and it's rough. Other times I'll work part of the morning, and then I'll come back and work half the night. and next Saturday I've got a job downtown at a big fancy business that won't let us do things like this and except on the weekend. And the manager or the head maintenance guy doesn't want to work on Sunday. So my next week Saturday I'll be working and I'll have Sunday off. So or at least that's the plan anyway. And then of course there's those, hey, you can, moments where you think you got the time off and somebody calls up and they got an emergency, and you wouldn't think there's an emergency in the grease trap business, but if you're in a restaurant and your grease trap overflows and you got nasty, nasty stuff flowing over your floor, yeah, yeah. Now, who are you going to call? You're going to call Ghostbusters. I can tell you that. You're going to call somebody like me, and we're going to go down there and what we got to do, what we got to do, right? So I just got done recording four days for the RPG day challenge for the RPG Brigades 2017, and so while we're here and I'm still in the same thing, I got to pound out a couple more of my MERP books because that's what I'm doing, right? I got a lot more to go, and I don't, like any good game system, there's a slew of things. And this particular one is a classic. One of the early ones, one of the first ones they put out, is called Goblin Gate, and we're all familiar with Goblin Gate. If you know anything about Middle Earth, Lord of the Rings, you know about Goblin Gate. And it's titled Goblin Gate and Eagle's Eyrie. It takes place in that particular neighborhood where the dwarves got hung up by the goblins, and where the giants had their thunder battle, and the eagles saved their bacon. But it also expands on that because it added a few other things that, of course, not in the books, not in the movies, which is okay. And as I've said before, and I keep saying it, I keep emphasizing, ice went out and did things a little different than the average run of game systems. This is what they call a fantasy role playing adventure module from J.R. Tolkien's Middle Earth. And yet, as a module, it's much more like a source book because it's a location source book because it includes things that you won't normally find in most baseline modules. And even they make those. Like I've said, I've reviewed a few and we'll review more of them where they don't include this stuff. But this particular one, like many of them, focuses on an area of importance in the game and in the book, and they wanted to make sure we had as much flavor material, as much mechanic material as possible to make it as playable or enjoyable as we can, right? So, as typical, we got a brief history of the region, the land itself, the climate, the flora, talks about the roads and passes through the central Misty Mountains. We got the fauna, the great vampire bat, orcs, of course, bears. You got commerce. Then you got the inhabitants, the orcs, the Northmen, the Bearnings, great eagles, the stone giants. Now, when we define orcs, there's been some debate over the last years, and that debate is not new by any means. Even in the movies, you see the goblins in the movies, and they look completely different from the orcs of the north that are pursuing the dwarves. And the conjecture is that the goblins and orcs are the same thing. Now, in most fantasy settings, RPGs, that's not true. They define them as completely different species or subspecies of the humanoids, where in Lord of the Rings, the great debate's been raging about whether or not goblins and orcs are different. They're, at best, they're a different tribe of the same class, of the same humanoid class, if you will. And so they define them as orcs in here, just so you know. Anyway, the Northmen, the Bearnings, those would be the bear shifters, the skin shifters, or whatever, stone giants. Then we got the politics and powers section, the Orcish realms, the military forces, the Northmen and their military forces, the Great Eagles, which ironically apparently don't have a military force because they are one, I guess. Physical overview of the area, wilderness travel, Goblin Gate, the portal to the underworld. So in the case of the wilderness travel, whatever route adventurers choose to enter the region of the high pass entails wilderness travel. Several options lay open, balancing considerations of speed, cost, and safety. Once established in the area, the adventurers will then again have to traverse the wilderness in order to reach key sites. Furthermore, the wilderness exploration will prove exciting in itself, especially for an inexperienced group not yet confident enough to face its major challenges. General maps with the principal roads and terrain features can be obtained before entering the region, but details must be filled in by local sources of information or personal excursions, the typical adventuring session, a game. Isn't that what it is? We go on about that sort of stuff in a lot of our discussions that keep reoccurring on the blogs, and on the Brigade channel and the RPG channel and a number of others. The you know, how much do you do? People talk about the dungeon crawl. Well, the meadow gamers and stuff like that. A lot of those want to glaze over this sort of stuff. Where I've always been a big fan and believer that getting to a place is as much as a part of the adventure as actually getting to the adventuring in the place where you're trying to get all your stuff. So having a session where your people are dealing with nature and the environment and the weather and the little things that can become big things in a hurry. We got to cross a raging, icy cold stream coming down from the high mountain pass, and a couple dice rolls of skill sets get you across, but one fail, and the rest of the session is your fellows chasing you down the stream, trying to get you from before you go over the falls, or perhaps getting you after you've gone over the falls and putting you back together again. Been there. Maybe that's a little boring for some folks. I don't know. Anyway, Goblin Gate, the Port of the Underworld, Methethelberg, the Mark of the Upper Undead. It's the Northman village, one of the largest up there, I guess. Then we got our Chapter 7, Adventure Guidelines, setting an adventure, choosing a time period. Yeah, I've got enough stuff on that. I was hoping they'd give us something new on the time period stuff. Just here. Those GMs desiring a simple adventure may not be concerned with the particular period of the temporal setting. They can, however, enjoy more flexibility, add more of their own designs by choosing a time outside the scope of those mentioned here. If you're running a campaign set during a specific era, any adventures around Goblin Gate will naturally take place in that time. Ain't the trucks? Okay. The one of those things that's I don't want to say unique to MERP, but definitely a key component, and you don't see this in very many of the other game systems, at least that I have, is that it's actually pre-established with a number of timelines. And so what I mean by that is you can play in the late Second Age, you can play in the early Third Age, you can play during the War of the Ring, and you can play afterwards. So they actually give you little quips and signposts and stuff that allow you to adjust your game session. The common thread is Third Age 1640. That's set 1,000 years before the War of the Ring. So everything that takes place in the books, for the most part, is the future. And there's still enough of the ancient realms, like ancient Arnor, is still intact enough that you can deal with it as a city in country and wilderness encounters. You've got things like the Witch King in play, and Mordor still, while the Sauron is in hiding, some of his Nazgul are still creeping around. Most of them are out in the far east, but you got the number one up north playing the Witch King. So I mean, it's one of those unique things, something I always found to be interesting. I know we got our encounters. And then we get into Chapter 8, Adventures in Goblin Gate, Struggle for the Throne, the plot, Operation Over. Yeah, maybe your adventuring group gets hired or captured by a rival group to the the Great Goblin, and either forces them, coerces them, or bribes them into becoming involved in a coup. That opportunity or option there. I tell you what. we're all familiar with the Lord of the Rings movies. You've seen the big old fat chin waggling Grey Goblin. Well, you know, not all of his predecessors were so. This guy here is buff. Looked like he about ready to take your head off. You know, much more convincing as a goblin ruler. Anyway, so when we're dealing with the Goblin Gate, of course, is mostly underground, and we've got plenty of maps. We show the entrance to the caves, to some of the interior caves. There's a cut across, cut view, the hidden entrance up on the high pass, the main gate they call the Wolf Gate, uh, so on and so forth. Speaking of the Wolf Gate, here's their rendition of the main gate on the main pass. This is the reason why the dwarves chose to take the high pass and the much more dangerous pass for traversing the Misty Mountains than going along the main road and running into the horde of goblins that were basically cutting off people from getting from point A to point B. And like I said, we've got plenty of maps, stuff to work with in here. Gives you all your descriptions. This is the entrance to the Wolf Gate itself. And then we got more. We're talking about the interior, large overview, and that's typical when you're dealing with something of this scale. I mean, how can you put something the scale of Moria into one book? They do, but it's a struggle because you can't focus on 1,000 different little caverns and rooms like you would prefer. So they give you an overview map, they hit the prime points, the key junction points, that kind of stuff when possible. Then they give you samplings. They give you samplings of this or that, and you have to work with it. That's your job as a GM, as you well know, to piece everything together when you're dealing with these things. Goblin Town's level 3, the torture chamber, the arena. So here's some movement encounters. Chapter 8.2, rescue from the depths. So there's the depths. There's another adventure. Somebody's reminiscent of the movies and the books where you somehow or another your character group has gotten caught by the goblins and you got to need rescued, or you're going to rescue yourselves, or more likely in this case somebody else got caught and you got hired to go rescue them. So you talk about being out of a place, how rough would it be to, as a human, elven, whatever, dwarven rescue party, to infiltrate a place like this. It's just swarming with orcs and not get yourself in trouble. Oh, and of course you can't have an adventure without including Gollum in here, right? But they do emphasize that there's a certain period of time when he's here and when he's not. He's here for quite a few years, a number of centuries, of course, and they emphasize you can't kill him. You can wound him, and you can't get the One Ring unless that's the GM's prerogative. You can rewrite the book, you can rewrite the movies, you can rewrite the history if you want. Your party could get the One Ring much sooner, and then taking in mind how much would that affect the grand scheme of things, right? How big a difference would that draw Sauron at a much sooner point when he's weaker? It's just plausible. He's diminished. It would definitely bring attention from the Witch King and the other than Nazgul. They're going to come looking for you. Just something to consider. Adventure 3, 8.3, Raid on Goblin Gate. Then we get into Chapter 9, Mithelberg, and I may not be pronouncing these properly, but it's Adventurers may convince from the Northman town of Mithelberg at any point of the third or fourth age. For settlement is continuously on the same site, unlike Goblin Gate, however, undergoes radical transformations due to its dependence on culture. Also, a lot of these Northmen and stuff are the predecessors of the Rohirrim, and there's a point where Rohan rides to the south, and then most of their tribes relocate after the King of Gondor or the grants them the northern section of Gondor, becoming the Rohan. And so at that point, you see a diminished number of Northmen in the north. They eventually repopulate, but they become a different branch, if you will, from the Rohirrim. Anyway, we got our nice, convenient map of the town. And I know I bring this up every time. You know what? Bang, there's another pre-made town that's just ripe for reuse, recycle. By gosh, the lazy GM should be, like I said, should be the lazy GM, because I truly, truly believe that's what this stuff's great for. It's good for the first go around and we play the game and we move on, but we come back and I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons, or God forbid, Pathfinder or some other game system that I don't own, and instead of spending 2 days on the weekend trying to create a village that my group's going to spend 10 minutes in, I just pull up one of the hundreds I've got pre-made and go to my run a copy off of, scan it, print it, staple it together, and say, all right, rename the town. What? 20 minutes. 20 minutes instead of 2 days worth of work. And that's really important. It's the central piece to a part of your game session for a number of, part of your game world for a number of sessions. Just borrow. Yeah, right. Brigands in the Tower, or the Giant's Isle, other adventure settings, blah, blah, blah. Of course, our Master Beast table or NPCs. And like I said, once again, these are awesome things because they translate well. I've got a whole folder full of the damn things. So if I need a random NPC because of my adventures or run into somebody, I don't have to fumble. I got a nice cat sitting right behind the screen who decided to scratch his ear, scratch her ears. You can see right there. Yeah, well, you can't see the ear. Pull the ear over. No, stop shaking the table, you goober. All right, what are you gonna do? Gotta love the cats. Gotta love your spouse. Kind of gotta love your kids. Not so much your neighbors. What have you? Goblin Gate. It is what it is, my friends. Goblin Gate. One and only.